There's a surprising little verse in the end of the book of Romans in the Bible, in the New Testament. The book of Romans has this list of people, and it's a very interesting list. It's unusual because in the New Testament in the Bible there's lots of letters, and there are definitely greetings, but this is unusual that there's such a long list of people to say hi to. And sometimes it makes me wonder, why so special? Why all these different people? Paul is talking to all the believers in Romans, but he goes through quite a list of them. And so one of those folks is in Romans chapter 16, and it's in verse 23. I'm just going to read this little bit here. It says, Erastus, who is the city's director of public works, and our brother Quartus send you their greetings. We don't know everything about this guy, but we do know in this version it says Erastus was the city's director of public works. He had quite an important role, considering he was in Rome, somebody who obviously had a very important job to be doing. And sometimes we wonder, with a person like that, they've got that kind of position and they're trying to live out their life as a Christian, and it seems quite strange almost, because of course what we do know is Christians sometimes had a very difficult time in the early church. In the times of the New Testament, we realise that sometimes it was very tough to be a Christian. There are other times that we're aware that people like Paul the Apostle used his citizenship as a protective thing, and he certainly had a level of protection because he had Roman citizenship. But here's somebody who's deeply involved in getting stuff done, in holding down a very responsible position. And I just want to encourage us, whatever your task is, whatever your job is, whatever your role is, maybe it's an important profession, maybe it's something that has an influence in the town or city where you live, maybe it's something that has a very public face to it. Maybe you're somebody in that kind of important role. Maybe you feel like you're very much a background person, your job isn't that major. You wonder why you're doing it sometimes. You don't feel necessarily very appreciated. You're somebody who does something that to others they might consider quite menial. Whatever your job is, remember that God has a great purpose for you and wants to use you and make you a blessing through that. I was just reading today a very interesting little book that I got hold of a number of years ago. A friend gave me. It was about the Moravians, so quite a major movement in the church. It goes back quite a few, about 300 years now, and they had a very interesting missionary zeal. They would go off to many different countries, and they got into the Caribbean, into the islands around the Caribbean. They were quite early missionaries to many of the places they went to. People had never really considered going to some of these places before in quite the same way as missionaries trying to win people to the good news of Jesus. And what's interesting is I wanted to find out whether they had a particular view about slavery. And it was fascinating because they definitely had Christian followers. They discipled, they looked after, they taught, who were slaves. They didn't at that point encourage them to rebel or to overturn their slave owners or whatever, but they did encourage them to really work to the best of their ability. And that sounds like they compromised. Did they not care about justice? Did they not have some sense of what was right and wrong? And even their leader, Zinzendorf, who was their sort of very founding leader, as it were, he wasn't particularly dead against slavery. However, and what was very important with this is that later on, the evidence that they had of what was really going on in the Caribbean amongst slaves, what was happening in the whole slave trade, the evidence of what people experienced, they were able to give that very clearly to people like Wilberforce, who's very famous in the UK as being a real advocate in campaigning with great passion against the slave trade. And one of their key people as well among the Moravians was a good friend of Wilberforce, so he was able to help him with a lot of very clear information about slavery. And the other thing that people say that was very interesting with this is that they were able to report back and say, look, there are some places where slaves have rebelled, where it feels like perhaps social chaos has ensued, where things have been very volatile. But we can tell you, in the places where we've worked, the slaves work hard, they're reliable, they're honest. The people that we've had in our churches, they are people that you can trust. And you know what? There's a great reason why people should be allowed their freedom, because you are sure that they're going to be good citizens, the people that you can actually depend on. And so they were able to kind of give that sort of report back to Wilberforce, and they were able to offer a very glowing report of the kind of people that they had in many of their congregations, and who were people who, to be honest, in the future would make good leaders, would make good citizens, were people who weren't just up for a riot. So whether or not they were right about, speaking more openly about slavery, the fact is they were able to make it really clear that by teaching people to work and be responsible and demonstrate the fact that they were good and reliable workers was something that actually really stood as evidence for people to be liberated from slavery and to be people who could be trusted in the work world in which they lived. And so I just illustrate that point just because it's a hard one, isn't it? Sometimes people are in incredibly difficult circumstances. And I'm not saying that all work is done justly, all work is done in a way that's managed properly. And there are lots of examples in Christian history too, where people have really advocated for those who are oppressed, that they've been very much at the forefront of labour movements, or someone like Wilberforce is a really good example of people who have campaigned politically to say, although this is a big part of our economic system, there's something fundamentally that needs to change, because people should not be owned by another person. Something that needs to change in the whole culture and the economy in which we live. So sometimes there are important roles for people to take on in terms of leadership, in terms of making sure workers are treated fairly, in terms of the way people's labour is treated and being properly rewarded as well. And that applies to today as well, and the challenges we have about modern day slavery. But my point underlying with this is that whatever the situation and whatever the position we're in, whether it's something that really is a very difficult job, whether it's a job that you just don't want to be in right now, or it's a circumstance that is incredibly hard and you know there's elements of real injustice, or whether it's a role of great importance and influence, like Erastus, somebody who has a great influence over others and a position that has great influence in the city or the context where you live. Whatever our situation, there are pressures and challenges in pretty much any role that we take on. But God wants us to understand as we do things with that ability to trust Him, as we do things with that attitude to say, okay, Lord, be Lord of my day, be Lord of my employment, be Lord of my working life, be Lord of my 9 to 5, be Lord over the role that I play in my work today, be Lord over the tasks and duties that I am going to perform. As we do that, we can entrust ourselves to God, and we can know that we can be a blessing wherever God has placed us right now.